Hello, and welcome to Silver Tent TV, the home of wise women with wisdom worth sharing. That's the first time I've managed to get all of that out. So, in this call, we're going to be talking about abuse, the problems of abuse, and also maybe some of the wins about it all. And I've got Janet, Lucy, Lorna, and myself, Sunday, and we're members of the Silver Tent. And I'd like us to introduce ourselves. So, if I go first, I'll say that my name's Sundy GILCHRIST. I live in Ilkley in West Yorkshire, and I'm an estrangement coach, a relationship coach with estrangement as my speciality area, one which I didn't think that I would have, but anyway, that's a long story. And why I'm on this call is because abuse has played quite a significant role in my life, and partly, well, perhaps a lot of it, it's been one of my keys to my what I would call awakening. So some of the things that I've experienced about being abused, but also being abusive myself, has been my key to finding out who I am. So that's me. Lorna, would you like to?
Yes, thank you, Sandy. Yes, my name is Lorna Monroe. I'm down here as a champion for change. And I guess abuse has helped me to be that champion for change in many ways, which we may get into later on. I'm a holistic therapist with my own business in Inverness in the Scottish Highlands, and everything has changed for me this year. So it used to be holistic health, now it's human holistics. So I cover all aspects of our holistic living. And I guess over the years, I've recognized that this abuse can be in these four main aspects of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And there's so many dimensions, isn't there, that we can come into this discussion. Anyway, it's good to be here, and I'm going to pass the baton over to Janet.
Thank you, Lorna. So I'm Janet Powers. I'm in South Wales, and my final career so far in my 70s is as a life and leadership coach and a writer as well. And I'm really, really interested in this discussion because I had 34 years in my first marriage, which in many ways was a wonderful marriage, 3 wonderful sons. But even before I was married, I knew that my partner had a short fuse and a temper. And that carried on through our marriage. And what I realize now is that I was raised to be a people pleaser, and I really didn't know how to stand up to him, how to change it, how even to voice the way I was being hurt, which finally ended in divorce. I've learned an awful lot since, and from my second marriage too. But it's really taken me most of my life to learn my own self-value and my own self-empowerment. And looking at the stats for like the Western world, UK and United States, like 1 in 4 women will have some experience of abuse in their lives. And I think that's huge and too much, you know. So what I really enjoy most of all is coaching women to find their own self-value and their self-empowerment and to have a better life. So that's what I'm about. Oh, so I'll hand you over to Lucy now. I'm pleased to meet Lucy because I didn't really know her before this call, so that's great.
Thank you. Likewise, Janet. I'm Lucy Jordan. I am English, but I live in Greece. I live Kara Island in Greece, and I've been here in Greece for 20 years. I, amongst many other things, like artist and animal communicator and all sorts of things, I'm a spiritual regression therapist, past life regression. And I'm here because I guess, well, I don't know who actually hasn't experienced some kind of abuse, even though they may or not know that it is abuse. It seems to be endemic in our human culture, certainly in our Western culture. But I'm here because I guess from my work as a spiritual regression therapist, there's a kind of a rather unique, maybe not unique, view of abuse yeah, and being the youngest of 4 brothers with a, you know, a kind of dysfunctional family, I have experienced abuse, not physical. Thank you. Didn't need that for some reason, but yeah, emotional, mental, and it's a long road to climb out of that kind of abuse, because it's not tangible like physical abuse. Anyway, that's my view, not having had physical abuse, but yeah, it's something that goes very deep in us. Yeah, that's me.
Okay, thank you. So we put together a series of little questions, and that some of them we may get to use, but we may not, because it might just flow like these conversations do. And I will start us off with this one. So what is the definition? Like, what is your definition? Is it a subjective definition, or is it a collective one, objective? You know, I think I'd like us all to speak to that. And who'd like to kick us off with that? Excuse the pun.
I can say a little bit more if you like, because like Lucy, it wasn't any physical abuse. For me, it was verbal abuse. So you don't see it perhaps at the time as abuse so much, you know, just like, oh, this person's not being very nice in the way they're communicating with me. And the interesting thing was in my marriage was it wasn't usually about me. I did a lot of reflection after more than at the time. But I was the doormat, and if my husband was up against some, which he was sometimes, some difficult times outside the home, he would come home and he knew he could let rip at me, you know, and yeah, I wouldn't fight back, kind of thing. So, and I didn't really see it as abuse at that time, but I certainly know it is now. But it was very kind of emotional, and because I couldn't stand up to it, I bottled it all up. So once he'd lost his temper, he'd forget about it within a few hours. But for me, I'd be hurting for a week quite badly. And of course, that built up layer on layer then, as I'm sure people will understand. So, yeah, if it's physical abuse, it's quite clear, and probably sexual abuse. I've got the list here, but when it comes to more emotional, verbal abuse, especially if you're in you know, we have 3 boys, you kind of deny it in a way as well. I think you need to get on with life. So you manage to do that for quite a while before you realize or feel empowered enough to get out of it. So, yeah.
Thank you, Janet. Well, the thing that you said that I was so inspired to respond was that I was hit as a child, and it took me well into my 30s before I could even contemplate that was abuse. I find it stunning that I actually had to convince myself, and I suppose in a way I was losing a lot of beliefs, and to sort of start to pick at that, well, I was abused, so what does that mean? You know, I knew it was wrong, and yet I couldn't sort of, because I hadn't really looked at what abuse was. As I was young, little, you know, I got hit a lot and got forced and controlled, and it's interesting because then I went on to repeat that patterns. And I know, Janet, you've got a question about that, and I'm really curious. You know, that question will come up later. Excuse the little fandango that's going on there, if you can hear it. But for me, I've lost the thread of what I was saying there now. Being hit was just part and parcel of living in this vibrant, noisy family, of which I was the youngest. And also, that's what I was saying. I then went on to be abusive, and further on down the line still, you know, I've now got that definition that if anybody shouts, that's abuse, you know, shouts at. And then, of course, there's all the self-abuse as well. So I find this topic absolutely fascinating because, like you say, I think it was Lucy, you said it's so endemic, you know, people shouting at each other, road rage, all of that sort of stuff. You know, everywhere there seems to be this this violence and abuse, you know, and those sort of things go. And it's funny when I first started to talk about abuse, my family thought that I was referring to sexual abuse, because that, again, I think people think when you talk about abuse, they immediately go to that as a first port of call, then think, oh, domestic violence. It's almost like it comes down in the series of awfulness, whereas shouting at somebody perhaps isn't considered to be abusive. I stand, that's my point of view on that. And, other people will have different points of view, because you hear that phrase, don't you? Well, I got hit as a kid and it didn't hurt me, when it sort of knocked the sort of sense into me, and legitimising. I suppose I was part and parcel of that at the beginning, but then as I've got older, I've thought, well, it has harmed me. There are consequences, but then again, that was the portal to my awakening, sort of looking at all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that, Sunday. Thank you. I wasn't hit so, like, I only remember one thrashing that I had, and that's the word that got used in the 60s, 70s. You get a thrashing or a leathering, or and my belief was it was for my own good, because I had sort of wandered off and put my family into panic as a little tiny like 2-year-old or something, and then as a 3-year-old wandered off again, and then it's like you get the flashing, because I had to do that for your own good, because you wandered off, and it was, and I understood, like, later on in life, how the fear, when I became a mother myself, and the fear of having this little children, and I had like 2 years between my 3 daughters, and it's like if they wandered off, even if they were on the swings, I'd be like, whoa, and scared for them. And as my daughter always saying to me, you're putting your fear into her, like my granddaughter now, she says she's not got fear, you're putting your fear into her. So it's like that fear gets passed down, and we don't call it abuse. Well, I didn't call it abuse. I always felt totally loved, and all my needs were being met, I thought. And like you say, Sunday, well, I got hit and it didn't do me any harm. Yet when that portal is open and you start looking at yourself and going deep into your own shadows, and it's quite scary looking at it, because as that little child, you don't know the words that go with the feeling that you're feeling. So I had to look at how could I have been feeling as that 3-year-old. I was feeling hurt, I was feeling upset and humiliated, embarrassed. These are quite strong words, but when that was going on, it was just normal. Yet, and then the other one, what was the other one? Oh, for me, it was like the sword, the tongue is sharper than the sword, because sticks and stones will break your bones and names will never harm you. So you, like Janet, you said you're in an abusive marriage, and I mean, I was just as good as my ex-husband with dishing out the sharp tongue, and that verbal abuse. I felt, looking at one from my own journey, was that it stuck deeper than a slap, and it's funny right now, because I'm deaf in my left ear just now. I've got a lot of stuff going on with it, and it's been like that on and off for years. And I'd actually said that my ex-husband was verbally abusive, but he never was physically, and it's actually that memory came back, but he had hit me in that side of the ear. And I remember going to the doctor, because it was in so much pain when I put my head underwater, that I said that a door had hit me, because I didn't want to say, but because I had felt so bad that I had made somebody feel that they wanted to hit me. So, we were probably as bad as each other in many ways. But at that point, I was in the blame game, and, blaming everybody else for that. I don't want to go on too much. Give Lucy a chance. So yeah, it's a really juicy topic, isn't it? It's like you could go down so many ways, and it's one person's interpretation might not be the same as another's. And what that abuse is like, because I always recovered far better from a slap than I did from words. I definitely find that. Yeah. Thank you.
What the definition of abuse is? I mean, it's a rhetorical question. I'm just wondering whether it's something like power, wanting power over somebody, because bullying is a form of abuse, and bullying can take all sorts of forms, physical, verbal, like a gross violation of someone else's boundaries, personal boundaries. And I guess we're in a culture that doesn't encourage self-responsibility. So, you know, you were saying, all three of you, really, what's happening is the abuser is passing on their pain to their victim. And I put that in parentheses because there are no victims, really. You know, on a certain level, on a soul level, there are no victims. But maybe, you know, it's just part of our human evolution. Is abuse is probably a really important tool for self-development, or for both sides, the perpetrator and the victim. I mean, without it, if there was no abuse, what kind of world would that be? Well, I mean, probably beautiful, right? But it's something, you know, utopian, maybe. Yeah, that's a bit of a...
Yeah, I've gone down that one as well.
Can I just say a little bit about my
Yeah.
second husband, because he is also a coach, and we did a lot of self-inquiry, but I learned a lot from him, because when he was a little asthmatic boy, about 4 or even younger, his father beat the living daylights out of him. He had a big, strong father who beat him for being joyful. Can you imagine? You know, and it affected him, as you can imagine, a lot. And like reflecting on it, I'm thinking, and his father's father beat him also. So I think, like, my husband's father, seeing this little boy joyful and free, triggered what he didn't have in himself, you know. I think that's what probably was the deepest thing that was, you know, he's had a lot of responsibility and other things, but it's interesting that, you know, as a little boy being so joyful and lovely, it triggered his father to beat the hell out of him until he thought he might have killed him, you know. It's so interesting. And what you said, Sundy, about your childhood, I guess you were really young. Like, what can you do as a child if you're really young? You're depending on those parents for your, you know, to survive. You know, you can't walk away. You can't do much about it, you know, when you're so young.
I did run away once from home, but they got me back. But the thing about my childhood was, you know, and I got complete with my dad. I want to make this clear that, you know, my dad was this very dynamic, passionate man who had these massive mood swings, and they were really fast and furious. And I remember Mum saying, if your dad's singing, it's all right. So when he wasn't singing, so the consequences, and maybe I'd like to talk a little bit about the consequences of living with that, was that I didn't realize how it stoked up anxiety in me. You know, I would be waiting for the next Sunday, come here, you know, my time wasn't my own. And if I got things wrong, or if he got angry, I'd cop for it. And you talked about left side, Lorna. All of my left side, which apparently is the feminine, is all bit vulnerable. I've got disc, I've got shoulder, I've got everything that seems to go mechanically wrong is down this left side, which of course was the side I used to get swiped on, mainly my head. And can you imagine, like, the reverberation? So the consequences of that was that I had all this anxiety, but the other conflicting thing was Dad was very loving, so I had all this love. So it was like this polarity between this being yelled at, hit and shouted at, and also this being cuddled and loved. But the thing that struck me the other day was that I suddenly remembered having to stand in the kitchen, because we worked on a farm and I worked with him a lot. And if he got cross, he either used to clout me and then send me away, or he used to send me away, and he used to get me to stand in, he used to get me to go into the house, which was the kitchen of the farmhouse. And I remember standing on that red square pan-tiled kitchen floor, just waiting for him to come for me. And he just used to say, come on, let's have you. And no apology, no recognition, nothing. So that's how I lived. That's how we all lived, actually. It wasn't just me. And so the sound of the door opening in the kitchen, even when I go there now, because we've still got that house, it will evoke this stimulus in me. It's not the comfiest place to be, isn't that house, you know? But I also recognize that I picked up his patterns with my own children. So another consequence, which was the most painful one, was me realizing that I was doing the same to my girls. And that was when I started to, I'd be about, I don't know, late 20s, early 30s, when the penny started to drop. And I'd been a mother for about 9 years at this time. And the penny started to drop that I was abusive, but I didn't label it like that. I just knew that at that point that it wasn't right, and that I had no control over myself. I'd go into these like spontaneous eruptions and do and say things that I would probably get taken to court these days if I was doing that. And you know, I'm sure it must still go on. It's just it's hidden or ignored, or, you know. So I can imagine that there are a lot of children who are still subjected to this parental, and we just pass it on like a pain parcel down the generations until somebody says, and I started to speak to my siblings and they're all in the camp of, well, maybe they're not now, but in that time they were all, you know, well, it didn't hurt me, you know, dad was a good motivator, by God he was. But I'm so glad that he started the healing journey in this pain in our family, because he did say to me once, you know, Sunday, when I get cross, just say something. And I thought, yeah, right, Dad, there's no way I'm saying anything to you. And then when I told him that I loved him and thanked him for my childhood, after I'd had this huge awakening when I was 40 something, and he cried and he said, I worried that you had a nice childhood. So he was the one, I think, and he was the last one of 8. So it's interesting, I'm the last one of 5. So he'd started a little bit of poking around in, I don't think I'm doing very well as a father. But yeah, and I've taken it that extra stretch on, and yeah. Yeah, thank you.
My little slice of suffering, as we call it, is, you know, the family disease of alcoholism. And so, you know, there's the abuse of the alcohol, maybe, and I'm a Scottish Highlander. It's a cultural thing. It's, you know, there's something wrong with you if you don't drink alcohol. And I don't think it's so rife now, but because there's quite a lot of people that's in my circle up here that don't take alcohol, but it's how it changes the behavior in the person that takes it. And you know, that saying the truth comes out when you're drunk. It's not true. That's not true in my case. And I always think that, you know, that learned behavior in those first 7 years, it's known now that in the first 7 years of life will mimic the parents. And I had a happy dad when he was having a dram, and he would sing and dance, and I was brought up with a lot of Kayleys and good things. But some of you know, I went on to see another side of that as well later on in my life, and the abusive side of that, as in verbal, physical, mental, spiritual. And you know, as you're saying about the awakening, I was about 45 when I had I ended up in a 12-step program myself by being married to alcoholics. well, by being in relationships with alcoholics, developing my own alcohol abuse problem. And, you know, I wrote a book about that in 2020. It came out about living in 3D, drink, drugs and denial. And it was, but this was all about my own denial and my own journey. I wasn't really telling the deep down truths of things that happened to protect other people, really. And, you know, it's like, they've all got a different truth to me. They see it very different to the way I see it now, because when I was involved in the 12-step program, that's when I had this out of body experience and I started to see things very differently. But that was just the start of it. That was the start of me having to deep dive into my own shadows and see myself. And then I became so bloody guilty because of when I started seeing, like you said, Sundy, you were following that pattern on with your own girls. I was the same. And I tended to do a lot of shouting, and because I didn't want to hit them, but I threatened them. I don't know what, you know, I threatened them with the hitting. And I, even in school as a kid, there was always that threat, the belt was there and you'd be threatened with the belt. And I was this highly charged, sensitive child that was terrified, absolutely terrified. But I was a big child, so there was expectations, I think, I feel now, that was put on me because I was a big child. And oh, for goodness sake, you know, don't be stupid, you can't be crying like that, stop that crying. And you know, that sort of talk where you suppress it. You're right, okay, I better not be crying, and I better show that I'm a big and strong and I'm determined and I'm not going to let this affect me. And then you go on and you allow others to call you these horrible names, and you just take it, you know. And some of these things have been coming back to me recently about things that were said. But then while I was doing my own deep inner work, there's guilt. Just, I mean, it nearly suffocated me, the guilt, my own guilt of how I would be screaming through walls and shouting and bawling. And I think that, well, I know now that a lot of that's been used against me now as an ammunition of maybe more like a subtler abuse that by other people, because, you know, well, you did that and you said that. And I'm like, all right, yeah, well, you said it, Lucy, about we're not, you know, being responsible. We live in a society where we're too busy doing that, pointing the finger. And I mean, that was an epiphany for me when somebody said that there's 3 pointing back at you, Lorna. Oh, well, so there is. And yeah, so I mean, I was very, very blessed. Janet, you were talking about this inquiry, and I was very blessed to go into that. I am responsible and let it begin with me. And I still do that and take it back to me if I feel irked by anybody else and their words and what they're saying. I think in Scotland, there is now a law for emotional abuse and what that entails. So, you know, there is, and it's about the verbal, you know, verbal abuse.
Think
So,
as well that
yeah.
in Scotland, you're not allowed to hit your children, are you?
No, you can get charged for it. I mean, there's different laws. I don't know what the whole thing is yet, but it's that, you know, a lot of people go, oh, it's just unconditional love, isn't it? We're all here to learn about that. And I love you saying about the soul, Lucy, because when I did like a lot of past life stuff, it came up in one of my soul realignments that 14 lifetimes ago, I was a healer, and I allowed a little girl, her soul to pass over, and the family put a curse of violence and depression to me, which has still been in this lifetime. So that's what came up for me as well on the soul level. I don't know if we're going to, I might segue over into that soul place, but sorry.
No, I think it's great. I think it's naturally just evolving.
Yeah. So soul contracts, soul lessons.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, often in my therapy practice, it's when we would go through the transformation stage. They call it the transformation stage, and there are perpetrators and victims, and the client could have been a perpetrator in their past life, or they could have been a victim. But the ultimate aim of the transformation process is forgiveness. But forgiveness is just a stepping stone to understanding that the history between two people who are in an abusive victim, kind of perpetrator victim relationship, is far more and far deeper than just in that present role model. You know, quite often it's like a classic thing where the victim was the perpetrator in another life, so it's like a karmic thing. But also there are cases when the soul of an abuser will agree to incarnate with the person who receives the abuse because they love them so much. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but on a soul level, it makes complete sense, because when a soul, from the work of Dr. Michael Newton, the Life Between Life, a pioneering work he did, where he'd take clients back to that time and space between incarnations. There's always the soul that incarnates always chooses the family situation, the family dynamics, the family relationships, the body, the type of body, the type of brain, the gender, the gifts, the aptitudes, and significant life events. And so an abusive life, a life where abuse is experienced, is, I don't like to say always in these things, but
Often.
it's always, clients who have experienced abuse, they always understand that they have chosen to experience that as a soul, because, you know, on the human experience is all about emotion. There's not that kind of level of emotion when we're not in a human experience. We're not experiencing life as a human, right? When we've left our meat suit behind and we're a soul. It's a far wider, deeper perspective of existence, but in the soul form than in the human form. So quite often there's a soul group. You have soul groups, and quite often a member of your soul group will volunteer to be or play the role of the abuser, because you as a soul, oneself as a soul, has chosen to experience abuse for soul learning, for, could be karmic, it could just be, I want to experience what it is to feel like nothing, to feel so separate from who I truly am. Because that's the thing with abuse, right? It makes you feel like you're shit. It makes you feel worthless and horrible and shameful, and, you know, all those really low level frequencies of emotion. You know, how many people have actually ended their life because they cannot go beyond their experiences of abuse, because they can't take it anymore. They can't stand another day with themselves because they feel so bad about themselves. They feel so awful. They feel so worthless. You know, and that's something that a soul chooses to go through. It's a great burden. It's not a burden, task. It's a huge task for a soul to undertake. It needs immense strength to choose that kind of lifetime. You know, especially like physical, sexual abuse as a child. It's got to be the most horrendous. So it's a tough road, but when one can reach that level of understanding that there is that, I'm sorry about the dogs barking. If you can hear.
It's very faint
it's
in the
faint,
background. It's
yeah.
fine.
Unless I go out and shout at them.
Abuse them.
Yeah. It's getting beyond forgiveness even, because at the soul level, there's nothing to forgive. It's nothing to forgive. It's an experience, and it's an experience that can, if we choose, can it evolve us? We can take huge strides in evolving our understanding from a soul perspective. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Lucy. You know, I've just recently cottoned into that soul level thing. I wondered why I found it so easy to forgive, you know, and I want to come to you, Janet. I just want to wrap this little bit up because of one of the questions that you asked. I'll come to you. I just want to wrap this little bit up in my own experience of this forgiveness thing, because I think that in itself is a massive thing, you know, because as I was forgiving Dad, I was forgiving myself, you know, and it was that thing, that sort of like dance between, well, I couldn't blame him because I was doing the same. So it's like, if I'm going to forgive me, I have to forgive him, you know. And I also feel that I've got this quite easy forgiveness thing. But what you said, Lorna, about just taking it, you know, I've just been so bloody strong, you know, just taking, and it suddenly dawned on me that, yeah, because I'm strong, I'm allowed, people think they can say what the hell they like to me and I'll still stand up. You know, I'll still be standing and just look, and I can remember things that have been said to me, and I've just been, I suppose in a way I was in shock, but I was also in this, you're not going to bloody beat me attitude, you know, bring it on, give me all you've got, you know, and they did. And I broke. And thank the Lord that I broke, because it was the breaking that actually allowed me to see my shadow, as you called it. And then this massive journey into all sorts. Yeah, Janet, you asked this question. Linking these two together, do you think that domestic violence is done by people who have been abused, you know, that sort of pattern, or do we go the other way? I mean, some people argue they go the other way, but then tying it in with that question, are we less likely to be abused, especially tolerate abuse as adults, if we fully value ourselves?
I'm coming to that conclusion myself, because I think people like would-be abusers, would-be bullies, they'll go for people who feel vulnerable, who don't feel self-empowered, who don't feel their own respect, self-respect and their own value. I think that happens with, I was bullied a little bit in school, and I can see why now. So I'm thinking, you know, for women, if we value ourselves, and I think that comes perhaps before having compassion for others, if we have compassion for ourselves. And I was listening to Lorna, and I think she does forgive herself now for everything, thank goodness, that, you know, she might have felt guilty about. I think we have to go through this process ourselves, and being compassionate and love ourselves, and not feel guilty anymore, and then stand in our own power and value. And then I don't think it's so easy for others to abuse us. I don't think we're more aware maybe, but we just won't take it in the same way. Do others feel it's like that?
It's interesting because I've got, if my thing is that I was aggressive, so I got abused because I was aggressive as I got older. I was ready for a fight, and lots of verbal fights. When I first joined Facebook, it was like a bun fest, you know, it was like.
But do you think that's a protective measure, that there's some fear below that when you're ready for a fight? You know, it's like,
was that if I get in first before it was getting first, yeah. So yeah. I can understand that it's lovely that we've got these different aspects of, you know, where we're coming from. Some of us have been verbally abused, some physically, in other ways as well. But yes, that's my answer to that, is that I experienced quite a lot of abuse because I was still abusive myself. So it was still going to come to me because I was still in that frequency, that vibration. I can sense people who I have to be careful around, because I can see if I was to go like that with them, they'd be off like a skyrocket and it would all fall on me. It still happens. inadvertently, I will still touch somebody's raw spot and they'll come out from behind whatever they were behind. But now the skills to be able to deal with that are different. And this is what I talk about, the gifts of abuse. You know, for me, it's offered me such a lot in my service, my personal growth. You know, I can hold a lot of aggro now. In the work that I work in, there's a lot of upset, and people who are upset tend to lash out. So, you know, I'm much more competent in being able to handle all of that.
Is that because, though, you might sense that behind others lashing out there's hurt, you know, because that's I think I can sense that in others. So I know there's a reason behind it now. I'm wise enough, hopefully most of the time, to know why people tend to lash out, you know, and not take it so personally, you know, because, oh, there's hurt, there's fear behind that. They've been hurt in the past, you know. I mean, there's even books about it now called What Happened to You, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah, so I think we've got to get to that place where we can understand where the abuse is coming from, or at least the, you know, lashing out, to deal with it, you know, in a better way, maybe.
I always find for me it depends who's in front of me, and I think, Janet, you liked we've talked before about Dr. David Hawkins, and he talked about having compassion for the innocent child, and that's where I tend to come from. It's like that person is lashing out because inside them there's a hurt innocent child, so I can have compassion for that. And usually, if I'm quick enough, I can come from that place. I find it a little bit harder with different people, but like you said, the soul group there, Lucy, if I'm always aware that it's like I'll move towards it. I do tend to move towards it, especially if I feel something in myself. Where I feel a little bit of that aggro coming up in me, I'm like, ooh. Well, there it is. It's still there, you know, it's still there. If it's a specific person, I don't avoid it. I'll go towards it. I'll go towards it, and because I know it's something in me that needs that healing. But all I've done is press my button. And there was something else I was thinking about abuse. Only recently, you know, there's still all this stuff. Like I have these conversations in my family, and I've been sitting listening to my daughters recently, last year especially, and I had this insight that, you know, when I had this awakening and then going deeper into what the spirit's ignited again in that moment, I believe. And so then, you know, because that spirit has been stunted maybe in the first 7 years in some way, and then it becomes ignited in the adults, it's like that has to mature. And in that growing, you know, like we grow these egoic minds and everything. So it's like in that growing, I grew this spiritual ego, and actually I abused my family spiritually in some subtle form, because I was growing this ego. But there was an element of, if I find something and I love it, I just want to take everybody with me. And of course, not everybody wants to come with me. And it's like, whoa, why not? I just, you know, I'll fall down a hole and I'll find something amazing. And I'm like, oh my God, come on, people, come with me. So, you know, and like my daughter said, one of my daughters says to me something about, but you say it like it's fact. And I'm like, well, it's been an experience for me. So yeah, I guess I see it as a fact. And then that's maybe how I express that, or how you take it. But actually, I'm probably poking their buttons more than I realize. But yeah, there was that element of, oh my God, I think that was probably me spiritually abusing in some subtle way that I wasn't aware of back then. you know, and
You mean like, Lorna, I want to ask, like, do you mean like feeling holier than thou because you
a little
found
bit,
the
yeah.
spiritual path? Yeah.
Yeah,
I know the
yeah.
way. Follow me.
Yeah, I am the light. I
No,
know
I am.
the truth. Oh God.
Lucy, have you got something to add to the mix, Luce?
Oh, I'm blank. Yeah, something that came up when you were speaking, Lorna, earlier in what you were saying. It's like there's an inner vibration, and it was mentioned earlier, self-abuse.
Mm.
How we talk to ourselves in our mind. I mean, it's awful. It can be awful, really, really awful. And so, like you were saying, Janet, bullies, abusers, they subconsciously pick their victims very well because it's someone who is not yet strong enough in themselves, and as you say, in their self-empowerment, to draw the boundary and say, up yours, get stuffed. An abuser wouldn't go for someone like that because they somehow instinctively know that they can't bully them. So really, the gift of abuse is self-love and self-respect, finally, isn't it? And self-forgiveness. But of course, there's nothing to forgive because we're all spiritual beings having a human experience. But it is such a gift, actually, abuse. It's like a fast track.
It is. It amazes me, and when you first start to lift that lid, and I'm a beggar because anything that's covered up in my world, what's in here, I've always been that, why do I do that like that and like just and want to look? And when I realized that I'd been abusive, and when I realized that even shouting at somebody or having abusive thoughts like towards people who would like, that dickhead, can you say that? When somebody's driving and you say, what a bloody dickhead, and it's abusive. And then of course you read a book like Nonviolent Communication by Marshall B. Rosenberg, and that sort of tips your world again, because then you start to realize the amount of unconscious abuse that goes on everywhere, and people, my experience is people don't always want to look, it takes huge courage to admit to myself, it did, that actually I've been abusive. And then, I don't know if anybody wants to talk about sexual abuse because, like I'm talking about shouting and hitting, which is like everyday occurrences in our culture. But for the women who have to talk about sexual abuse, I take my hat and coat off to those women because that must be the most difficult thing. And very often people, perpetrators, family members, whoever, because they're usually abuse is usually in the home. Let's not beat about the bush here. Most of stuff, it goes on in homes. So the family is sort of the birthplace of abuse. And a lot of people will have people who are still alive that, who are still, and we find it difficult to speak of. I mean, here, like protecting people, other people's identities, and family members, etc., etc. It's really hard. No wonder it manages to stay alive because it's sort of just always under the radar and people. So we're running out of time, but I wondered the sexual abuse thing, but also like stuff that you see in your everyday experience. Do we speak up to it? Do we stand up for the barista like I did recently, who was getting an earful from some customer that was being unpleasant? Do we say, hey, hang on a minute, do we call it out or call it up? I wonder, has anybody got a recent experience of speaking to it in public like that? As elder women, is that part of our role?
I think it is. I can't recall an experience, but I'm reading a book by Kristin Neff, who is all about self-compassion. But this book is all about fierce self-compassion about being the mama bear. We do it for our kids. That's when I've noticed it in myself, like, when it really comes out, if I need to be aggressive to protect my kid, I would. But I think as women, we can summon up our fierce self-compassion and speak for those that aren't ready or too vulnerable to do it for themselves. I think that's one of our roles that we should be taking on now, to help the generations that are coming up after us, who are still, some of them stuck in this place of tolerating abuse. And what I didn't become an abuser very much. I tended to shut off and give people a cold shoulder was my way of, being abusive, if you like. But I was an enabler. By not being able to know how to deal with it when it was happening to me, I enabled it to continue to happen. I realize that now. Whereas if I'd been a mama bear, for myself, I could have changed things, but I didn't know how. But I think it's important that we work with that if we can.
Yeah, Janet, thank you for sharing that, because that's really pertinent what you've just said about being an enabler. Thank you.
And also the the normalizing of abuse on the media.
Oh, yeah.
From our police, our governments. I mean, what we've just been through in the last 3 years is actually torture. These are techniques that Amnesty International have listed as typical torture techniques. We have all been abused by our governments, and it is like maybe a controversial statement, but this is what I truly believe. I mean, we don't know what it's like to be truly sovereign individuals. We're born into a society of abuse, top down. They say the fish stinks from the head. It's top down. And to what level do we want to talk about abuse? We talk about family abuse and the physical, emotional, but what about the abuse in our society? Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, he was agreeing.
The abuse of animals. Those of us who eat meat and drink and consume dairy products, those animals are being horribly abused. Where's their where's their right to live a life of freedom and peace? And because this is what humanity really wants, isn't it? Basically, just to live a life and raise our families, and
It's a strange way that we've constructed or been instructed or whatever to come onto the planet, isn't it? And beat the shit out of each other and then die.
Or beat the shit out of ourselves.
Yes. Oh, like what neutralizes abuse?
And I think that's probably why we had a mass exodus to the supermarkets to get toilet roll. When the whole stuff all happened at the beginning, it's like, really? Either we're scared of letting her go over shit, or we're just beating ourselves up a little bit more.
I wanted to ask Lucy, who's done more work, on past life regressions and everything. Like, surely our soul wants these experiences. It's a journey toward love. I mean, that's what we're all wanting at the end of the day, is love and peace, and compassion, and to understand this all stems from hurt and fear. And I wondered, have I got the right idea, Lucy? Is that why our souls choose to come for these lessons?
Generally speaking, it seems to be that way, especially the work of Dr. Michael Newton that I mentioned before. He wrote at least 3 books, thousands of case studies, and it seems to be that the reason for being in a human incarnation, because there's many other possibilities. It's not just Earth and human. There are many possibilities, but one of the reasons is Earth is such a tough place to be. It's the emotion, the physicality, having this physical body, which can feel pain and suffering. And it does seem to be a trajectory towards awakening, because part of the deal of incarnating on earth is amnesia. We have to forget who we are, really, you know, within the first months, years, maybe. We have to forget who we are and where we've come from. Otherwise, it would be like, wouldn't be any point, would there? Except if you're an avatar like Jesus, or, you know, one of these spiritual teachers. And I think there are more and more people are being, because we are evolving. We are consciously, as a human race, are evolving. There more and more, you know, the conscious awareness of our true existence is actually exponential. And then maybe we're experiencing this severe abuse, not only on an individual level, but a collective level, in order to, on a collective level, come to a place of real remembrance of who we really are.
I get that.
A mass graduation. Yay, Robbie! Throwing on hair.
I've got a couple of roundup questions for each of us. What have you collected for yourself with this call? What you're taking away with it? And also, what do you think we could have spoken more about or brought up, and what we're going to talk about next time if we do another?
Yeah. For me, it was, and it's something personal, because it's resonated with me, is to stop the self-abuse. It's a very bad habit I have of talking really horribly to myself. You've got to stop it. And Janet, it really on point that it's a frequency. What we're doing inside of our self-talk is what we attract. So for me, it's yet another reminder to talk kindly and compassionate to myself. And for more talk, yeah, I haven't got an idea about that right now. Yeah.
Normie, I don't have a follow-up at the moment, because there's so much. There's so much.
Yeah.
But like I usually say that I'm beating myself up with a feather these days and not a stick. So yeah, in fact, never mind beating myself up, I'll just tickle myself with a feather instead. Because for me, it's about being in joy, that, you know, contentment's for keep, happiness is fleeting, but I can really find a place of joy in myself a lot easier today than I could before, and I have various practices for doing that. And Lucy and I were virtual runners. Feels like another lifetime ago, weren't it, Lucy? But
I can't believe I even did that.
I know, right? So it's like running sort of part of my thing to keep myself. I get these insights when I'm out in nature and outside, and yeah, just to keep on keeping on, and noticing when it's to be aware. It's that self-awareness, just to expand on the self-awareness, and put myself up, and like you say, Sunday, if I see somebody else that I feel has been abused, not to ignore that and maybe jump in, use discernment, and because some people don't like you jumping in. And you may end up getting a mouthful yourself. Like they may want to fight their own battles. Yeah, but it's been a great chat.
Sunday, I'd just like to say it's been a real privilege to be on this call with 3 other lovely ladies, and especially hearing about other people's, you know, childhood experiences and what's brought them and their life's journeys, and you know how we've all really grown from our experiences, whatever they've been. It's been great, and I think we could talk more about this, certainly. And there's something else that I've got in my mind, but it's not for this conversation, but it's something that concerns me, and it's child trafficking, which I think is horrific now in the world. Oh my goodness, I can't think of a worse abuse, really. And if I can do something about that in some way, I hope you know, I can, but it's another conversation for another time.
I'm hearing you on that, Janet. I think we all have got our heart and eyes on that. Yeah, it has been a privilege. I think for me, I've learned a little bit about that spirit, just that spiritual ego thing keeps popping up. I know the way. Actually, I'm much more inclined to think and remember that we're on our own path, you know. And I think what we could talk more about is the benefits, you know, how we got through it. Because I think some people, you know, how did we start to open this? How did we start to explore the experience of being abused and what woke us up and all that sort of thing, you know, what our journey was and what are the benefits, you know, what has it brought us? And also more about that soul, you know, the soul contract thing. I think that certainly has helped me to forgive. When you realize that there isn't anything to forgive, it's all perfect. It really does bring a little bit of peace into this traumatic, violent world that we live in. So if you'd like to say tatty bye in your own unique way, I'll start the recording, and this will be on Silver Tent TV. And if you are enjoying Silver Tent TV, please do subscribe, because the more people these messages get out to, is part of the healing for the world. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh,
Bye.